Okay, perfect. I think we're good to go. Sorry for the delay. So yeah, welcome everyone to restart of our workshop. I think last time we were here was probably in May, right? So it's been a few months. So thank you for coming, even though I know the nights come early. It feels like 9 o'clock, but really not that late. So let me just introduce myself because I think sometimes there are people online that haven't, I think most of you know me, but maybe people online don't know me. So my name is Aziza, and I am one of the pharmacists at King City Pure Pharmacy and Wellness right here in King City. But I'm also a nutritionist and a wellness coach. And I feel that having that sort of that understanding, that awareness has really helped me have more of a holistic approach to health and healing. On top of that, most of you know that I was diagnosed with an inflammatory condition, 5 years back, and taking this approach to heal has really made a lot of this information very experiential for me. And that's what really drives my passion, because I realize that not only is this something that you find in literature or in books, but this really does work because I've seen it work on me. And so that's why I'm really passionate about it, and I like doing these things. So that's just a bit of an introduction about myself. And so let me just introduce the idea of this topic itself, right? Now, we started the series on inflammation, I think, early in the year, and we did two. One was really understanding inflammation, and the second was about sharing my stories about what I went through and what I did. And I promised at that time that I will talk about, we'll go deep down into all those lifestyle factors that actually impact our inflammation in our bodies. And one of them was stress. Now, stress really, it's really such an important topic, and that's why I wanted to address it first. Number one, because it is something that's found in literature. I remember being in pharmacy school, and that was a long time ago because I graduated in 98, so years and years ago. When we talked about diseases, it was always mentioned that stress is a risk factor. It's always one of the risk factors for all kinds of illness. And I always wondered, what is it about stress? But oftentimes we think of stress as something that happens in our head. We don't realize the power it has, what it can do to our bodies, right? But literature is clear that stress is a risk factor, right? And the other thing, the reason I wanted to address this is, oftentimes when I sit down with my clients and we are talking about medications, and when we do medication reviews, one of the things I always ask them when they're talking about their symptoms is anything happening in your life, right? And oftentimes they will admit that yes, there's a lot of stress, but I found that they feel very disempowered. They feel that they can't do anything about that, right? That yes, there's stress in their life. And I get that because I was there too. I had no idea that there was something I could do to change my stress response. And so those are the two reasons I felt that, it's really time to change the narrative around stress. I feel that, we all know that we experience it, but it doesn't have to be that way, right? We can change our stress response. And that's why this is will give you sort of an intro to that topic. Right? It's such a huge topic. We can't really cover all of it, but I'm hoping that I can at least have you understand what stress can do to your body and how we are still capable, especially chronic stress. There is something to be said about acute stress that happens in the moment. But long-term stress can be changed. We can change our perception. So with that, we can start the presentation. So it worked when he was here. This was a point here. Isn't that interesting? It was working so well. Okay, let me try if it will work here. That's right. This is so interesting. It was so good. Maybe I should just take out the whole thing and then just. That was so funny. Did it point anywhere different? Nope. There you go. Forget this technology. We'll just go the old-fashioned way. So that's what this is kind of the content we're going to talk about, right? So I don't know how many of you were there for the inflammation workshop. Were you guys there? So some of you were there, but it was a while ago. So I'll quickly do a summary of that. And then we'll talk about stress and where does it come from and the role of the nervous system, right? This is really important because, again, it is a system in our body that's creating that stress, and how do we regulate that system? I'll talk a little bit about the evidence that's there, and then lastly, we will talk about some of the things you can do to regulate our nervous system so we can bring our stress levels down, okay? Okay, so inflammation. We talked about inflammation. Now, inflammation is really a buzzword. I mean, I think most of you know about inflammation, right? It's something people talk about all the time. But what's often not understood is inflammation is actually a normal process in our bodies. It's not always bad. If we didn't have inflammation, we would not be able to heal from any diseases. You know, every time we would get a virus, we would not be able to get better because it's through the process of inflammation that our body actually heals. The issue here is that we have to distinguish between acute and chronic inflammation. Acute is short-term, chronic is long-term, okay? So just quickly, inflammation, like I said, happens when your body gets injured, if there are foreign things happening, entering your body. The easiest example I always give is when you cut yourself, right? So when you cut yourself, that's an injury, right? The body recognizes that there's been a breach, you know, there's a cut, and, you know, bacteria, viruses, dirt, all kinds of foreign objects can get inside the body. So right away, again, it's a natural response. The immune system wants to protect us. So it activates inflammation. You know, the area gets, you know, you get the throbbing, you know, blood supply comes in, it gets red, inflamed, it gets swollen. Those are all signs of inflammation, because what the immune system is trying to do is mop up all the invaders, right? It sends all these cells that you can see from the example. It's sending all these blood cells, all these yellow things are called macrophages. They're, again, cells that come in and eat up all those foreign objects. They do their job. They clean up all the stuff that's not supposed to be in our bodies. And then the third step always happens is the immune system turns on this anti-inflammatory process. So every time there's inflammation, when the job's done, anti-inflammation happens, which goes against inflammation. So it calms down the inflammation, body returns to normal, right? That's how it's supposed to work. That's how our bodies work. The issue happens if it was just acute inflammation, you got a cut, you know, inflammation took place, it healed, everything's back to normal. What happens, the issue happens when we have chronic inflammation. And that can happen if there's an issue with the immune system, it's not regulated, and it cannot turn off the inflammation. So inflammation is happening. The third step, which is supposed to be anti-inflammation to shut down that inflammation because all the work's been done, is not working well anymore. So what happens is you get constantly inflammation happening, right? Even if it's kind of halfway working, you're still not having it shut down. So you get a low-grade inflammation happening all the time. The other reason is if the injury to cells keeps happening. For example, taking the cut example, right? If I cut myself, as soon as it starts healing, I cut myself again, same area. If I keep causing that injury, the anti-inflammation process can't keep up because I keep injuring myself, right? And I gave you the example from something external, but this can happen anywhere in our body, inside our vessels, inside our organs, right? Many things can cause inflammation. And we'll talk about in terms of, and we did talk about actually in the first seminar on the different types of things that can inflame us, right? So this is what I mean when I say chronic inflammation is where the problem begins, is because that when it sits there for too long, it can actually create that common soil for a lot of these diseases. Now, I would say about 10, 15, definitely when I was in school, this wasn't known, right? This is something very new. I would say in the last 10 years that the research is now showing that just about every chronic illness, the root cause, the starting point is always inflammation, right? And so even things like depression, they've found, you know, diabetes, insulin resistance, all kinds of things. They're beginning, even coronary artery disease, which was a real big surprise because they always thought it was buildup of cholesterol. But underneath the buildup of cholesterol, there's injury first. Inflammation is the first step. Then cholesterol comes in, and then all kinds of things happen, right? So this is really, a lot of this research is quite new, but many researchers are now coming to the conclusion that inflammation really is the common soil from which all these chronic illnesses sprout up. And so really, if you want to treat illnesses at the root cause level, we can't ignore inflammation anymore. That has to be addressed, okay? So this is what I left you with last time, and we actually talked a little bit about each of them, but I promised that we would go really do a deep dive into most of them, or at least the more common ones. And again, chronic stress was up there, and so I thought, okay, let's start off with chronic stress, okay? But we'll go through the other ones in subsequent seminars as well. So this is the numbers on stress, right? This was actually an online survey that said that 46% of Canadians are feeling increased sensitivity to stress than they were prior to COVID-19 pandemic. Now, we all know the pandemic really did a number on all of us, right? There was a lot of stress, and what's I guess unusual, and we kind of knew that this stress was going to cause a lot more issues continuing on, right? But here it's this is 2022, and the people are still feeling stressed because, again, a lot of things have changed, and with the state of the world right now, with wars happening, it's causing a lot of stress in a lot of people, right? So it seems like there's never a break from this. Again, some other numbers from the Americans: 55% of Americans are stressed during the day. 63% of US workers are ready to quit their job to avoid work-related stress, right? So the numbers are pretty high, right? And so clearly this is an epidemic. And before we get into kind of understanding stress, I just wanted to open it up and ask you guys, what does stress mean to you, and how does it kind of manifest for you guys? Can you, because everybody has a different definition of stress, but what does it mean for you guys? If anybody wants to share, or if anybody wants to share online, they can unmute. Or none of you guys get stressed?
I think stress, if you see the way you see the system going,
yeah,
that's maybe can make me a little bit stressed.
Yeah.
Because I don't see nothing works right, or the way it is supposed to work, and you can do very much or almost nothing. And
that feeling of helplessness that you can't really change the world.
That's it.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah. So it's really a feeling, right? It's what you're perceiving, and the fact that you can't do anything about it. Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Would you say that stress is more something you feel in your head? No? Someone said no? Yes? No?
You feel it in a lot of other parts of your body.
You feel it in your body? Yeah.
Depends what kind of stress.
Yeah.
I don't know. I believe very heavy stress is, and nothing's covered all, but it can be so many different things.
Yeah.
All can contribute to it.
Yeah.
It could be physical things, it can be mental things.
Yeah.
It can be, the tragedy of the world.
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah.
And it all contributes to the stress level, which creates outcomes.
Yeah. So it's interesting you say that you are feeling it in the body, which is really important, because oftentimes, and I can say I didn't feel stress in my body before, but because we often tend to be very disconnected with our bodies, so we don't realize it. But one of the things I teach people is that, when you're under stress, become aware of the tension in our body. And you'd be surprised. I was surprised at the places that were tensing up, right? Stomach is another place, again, because of the brain-gut connection, right? Stomach, a lot of people feel the stress in their stomach, right? So it's really interesting because it's, like I said, oftentimes people think stress is kind of like how you're thinking about things, like the feeling of helplessness, right? But here's the thing, and we'll talk a bit more about it as we go along, is whatever you're feeling in your head is actually creating chemicals in our body, right? And that's why oftentimes when you're touched with your body, you feel it. You feel it in your body, right? So it's good that you know, you guys are aware of that. So let's define stress. Now, there's lots of definition of stress. I thought this was an easy one to understand. Again, just like inflammation, stress is also a natural human response. If we didn't get stressed, we would all be in trouble because we would have all been eaten up by the lion. Our ancestors would have all been eaten up, right? There is a reason why we have the stress response. So what it is a natural human response that prompts us to address challenges and threats, real or perceived, in our lives. Now, I want you to pay attention to real or perceived because we'll go deeper into that. And I just wanted to remind you, did I start recording? I did, right? Okay. In the middle of the record. Okay, good. So it is something that happens naturally because it is designed to protect us or allow us to deal with a challenge, right? Like I said, our ancestors, if they didn't have the stress response, you know, every time a predator was chasing them, they would have not moved and they would have been killed, right? So there's a reason for that. Stress is how we react when we feel under pressure or threatened. Okay. So let's, oh, sorry. So let me just give you examples of stress, okay? Studying for an exam. I have 3 kids in post-secondary education, and this is like a major event. Stress is always happening. Studying for an exam, it's a good kind of stress because if it wasn't there, they would just sit there and watch TV all day long. They wouldn't be stressed enough to study, right? So that's, you know, it moves you, it motivates you, challenges you. If you're in an accident, God forbid, or there's fire, right? That stress response that your body creates is there to make sure that you run away to keep yourself safe, right? If there's a deadline for a project, same thing. It challenges you, it gets you moving, that adrenaline keeps going, and you get things done, right? These are all examples of acute or short-term stress, right? What's supposed to happen is when that stress is, when the exam is over, it's supposed to be over. If you see animals on the wild, right? Like I have a cat, and one time she got stuck in a bag, like she just exploring. There's a plastic bag around. It got stuck somewhere in her neck, and she went ballistic. She was so right. We couldn't even hold her to take it. Somehow it came up, and she was like wailing, and she was stressed. And the next thing you know, after she was out of it within half an hour, she's back to exploring the same bags. And I'm like, you gotta get rid of that, right? So their stress response, it was acute, and then she was back to normal. She was, you know, playing and doing all kinds of things. And that's what it's really supposed to be when we are in a, you know, obviously that bag was threatening her, right? If we're in a situation of threat, we have a stress response, we come back down, and everything is okay. But does our body always return to normal after a stressful event? That's the question I'll leave you with. And here's where the real threat and the perceived threat comes in, right? This is a real threat. There's a fire. Again, you know, many parts of the world, you know, there are people under real threats, you know, of being killed. We are lucky, we're privileged, we're in a safe society that we don't often have the real threats. A lot of our threats are really what's in our head, you know? Again, you know, what the affairs of the world, what is happening, what's going to happen with the inflation, how are our kids going to afford, all these worries, ruminations, anxiety. For example, if you had an argument with someone, do you play out all the time? Should I have said that? I should have said that. Why did that person say that, right? A lot of these things, because we are humans, we have higher centers, and you know, we can do a lot of things with our mind. So oftentimes those perceived threats are also how we perceive them to be, and they're in our heads. But the body, when it comes to the reaction, doesn't distinguish whether it's a real threat or a perceived threat. Does that kind of make sense? Because this is an important distinction, and it will make more sense as you go along. But oftentimes, if you find yourself in fear, for example, fear for me is a big component of my stress. I'm afraid of a lot of stuff, and I know where it comes from, but oftentimes I get into my head and I can't do because I'm paralyzed by fear, right? Recognizing allowed me to see there's no fear, it's actually really in my head, right? So Recognizing the difference between real and perceived threat is step one when you're trying to understand stress and our stress response, okay? Now, this is important. I know that the picture looks complicated, but this is important to understand because the stress is really created by our nervous system, okay? Now, we have systems in our body. We have digestive system that is going to digest our food. So we have a mouth, the esophagus, the tube, and then we have the stomach. So whatever we eat, that system digests it. We have the circulatory system, which is where the heart is involved, the blood vessels. So heart's pumping the blood and it's going to different parts of our body, okay? Then, so every system is doing its particular job. When it comes to stress, it's our nervous system. A nervous system, if you can imagine, it's kind of like a highway of all these, like you can see these yellow lines on highways, right? Basically, just like blood vessels reach every part of our body to supply blood to it and nutrients, nerves are like these long highways that reach every part of our body, and they're transferring information in electrical signals from the body to the brain, from the brain to the body. And it's really fast because it's within nanoseconds almost, right? I mean, you touch something that's hard, your body's gonna know, your brain's gonna tell your hand, move away from there. That's the information highway, that's the nervous system. Nervous system is the one that is detecting danger. It's detecting a threat and it turns on your stress response, okay? Now, here's the interesting thing. The part of the nervous system that manages this stress response, where we feel really stressed and we're like worried, anxiety, and heart rate's racing, is called the autonomic nervous system. All I want you to remember from that is autonomic is automatic, which means, and oftentimes, that's why people come and say, well, I can't help it. I get upset when people do this. And I know that because I used to say the same thing. I would get really irritated or angry and I would say, I can't help it, right? Because it really, in that moment, for most of us, when we're activated, it feels like we cannot control it. I'll give you an example. I was supposed to come here early because I told my son to show me how to do it, and things got kind of delayed, and I was getting like stressed because I'm like, and I could see my heart was like tightening up. And so right away, I knew my nervous system was activated, and I used one of the techniques that I'll talk about to actually calm that automatic, because it was automatic. I couldn't control it, even though I knew I would get it in 10 minutes, even though I knew everybody would be okay if they had to wait 5 minutes. It's not a big deal, but yet I was feeling stressed, and I could tell it was an automatic response, okay? So this is important to understand because it gives you a bit of understanding that, no matter what you talk yourself into at that moment, it feels really like automatic, okay? So let's move on to next. Just a little bit more information about this system, the autonomic nervous system, which activates your stress response. It's really an inner surveillance system. Its job is to keep you safe. It's always looking out for threat, right? It's activated when it senses a threat, okay? Now we'll talk about why something is threatening to me and it isn't to someone else, right? Because different people have different responses. I'll give you an example, we'll talk more about that. But here's what happens when you have the stress response. Many of you have probably heard it's called the flight or fight, right? That's, for example, in that moment when I thought, oh my God, I'm late, I was having a flight or fight. It may not have been very extensive, but it was a flight or fight. Now, if I spent my entire day either irritated at someone or this, that, I am constantly in survival mode. My nervous system is constantly activated, and that's not a good place to be for your health, right? So understand the stress response is the flight or fight response, okay? This is just sort of another picture to show you that when you're regulated, right, there's the flight or fight, and the opposite of that is rest and digest, right? That's when healing takes place. That's where you feel calm. That's where you feel all the positive emotions. That's when you feel good, not frustrated, none of those other things that happen, right? It needs to be in balance. What often happens when we are stressed is imbalance. We are constantly in that activated stress mode or the activated fight or fight, okay? Now, I just gave you a bit of examples, and this is important because all of us need to recognize, if we want to work on our stress, we need to recognize what it feels like for us. Remember, it's a fight or flight, and actually freeze is also part of that, right? So oftentimes when you feel angry, irritated, restless, you know your system is activated. That was me. I was more of like a fight or fight before I went to myself. On the other hand, Heather is more of a flight. His response is more like, oh, distract yourself, get busy with things. But that's also an activated nervous system. But your response is different. So oftentimes people who are in the flight response don't even recognize that their nervous system is activated, especially if they're not connected with the body. Because the body will still give you the symptoms of the tightness and, all the other stuff, but they're so used to distracting themselves that they feel that they're not stressed. And people around them probably feel that they're not stressed because they're not showing the classic fight symptoms. But whether you fight, flight, or freeze, any of those symptoms, freeze would be more shut down, emotional numbing, you don't want to feel anything, you just want like everything's okay, kind of pretending. That's also the nervous system is activated. As far as the body's concerned, your nervous system is activated. Okay, so these three are all signs of an activated nervous system. Where you want to be is activate more of the rest and digest. When you find yourself in any of them, right? And we didn't even talk about all the physical symptoms again. And a lot of this happens, it's more, why are people different? It has to do more with, their coping style, what they grew up with, what they saw around them, right? So coping styles develop differently for different people. And that's why everybody's different in how they show up, whether it's flight, fight, or freeze. But all of them is activated. Where you want to be is creating more of the rest and digest, right? But remember, I told you it's automatic. So we have to do something to actually shut down that automatic response. We have to consciously do things to calm down that automatic turn on of the nervous system. So that kind of makes sense. I know it's a lot of new information, but it's really important. If we understood how it works, then we have the tools to change it. Okay, let me give you an example. I think this is going to help maybe. Road rage. I'm sure many of you have either seen it, hopefully no one's done it, but experienced it, seen it. I have seen it. And here's the thing, right? Say, for example, so when I was talking about earlier, people have different responses to the same scenario. Let's say someone cuts you off in traffic, okay? Now, the person number one would be like, oh, and then realize, oh, actually they didn't hit me. And they're like, oh, good, thank God, he didn't hit me, or I'm okay, he's okay, carries on driving, nothing happens, right? Number two person gets so angry, honks and gives him a finger and like yelling in the car, and and then he's so upset, gets home and complains to his wife, complains to his children, like he's angry, right? And that goes on for a few hours and then he calms down. There's number three who does all that, yells, screams, gives them fingers, and then comes in the front and blocks the other guy. And I've seen that happen at a stop sign. It was really scary. Comes out of the car and starts a fight with the other person, punch them or whatever. Last year, I don't know if you remember, last year in Schaumburg, I think somebody even took a gun out and shot someone, right? The incidence is the same, right? How is it that one person doesn't find it threatening, while person number three thinks that it's threatening his life, that he's willing to like kill someone or punch them, right? What's the difference between the three people? It's the same thing, and yet number three is fully activated, the sympathetic system, and again, it's so automatic, right? Again, if that person was aware that I'm getting activated, they could have done something. If they were aware that this is a nervous system regulation problem, I can regulate my nervous system. I don't have to get out and punch that guy. It would be okay. They could regulate themselves. But clearly, not everybody knows this, but you guys will all know this. So that's the difference, right? And we'll talk about why there's a difference. Maybe I'll touch a little bit on it so then we don't go after it. Person number one has wide window of tolerance. Person number 3 has a narrow window of tolerance. Okay. Person number 1 does not get activated at everything. Person number 3 gets activated at every little incident, because somewhere in his brain is perceiving it as dangerous. And there's a whole discussion we can have on how does the brain perceive something to be dangerous, because there's a part of the brain known as the limbic system, which is where these things are activated. And depending on the trauma, depending on the past, depending on the belief systems, some people get activated a lot more with the same things than others do. Does that mean you can't change that? Absolutely not. You can. There's so much evidence now that you can actually rewire the brain. You can rewire, and I'm a living example. You know, I feel I have actually expanded my window of tolerance. I am actually surprised at how things that would just throw me off for a loop and I would be upset for days and days, they don't. And I was actually quite surprised when I first noticed that. But anyway, so this is why this work is so important to me, because I want people to realize that you're not stuck with that. You know, yes, it requires work, but it can be changed.
One example, that allowed you to be able to change.
That was a lot of work. There was a whole bunch of work that requires. It requires a lot of inner work, identifying what your wounds are, what is this belief system that you have that you find certain things to be threatening, right? I had worked with a coach, I took a whole bunch of courses, but it requires you to become aware that there are certain things that, certain belief systems around, you know, for example, that person cutting that person off, that person had a belief system that perhaps he felt threatened, he felt, you know, disrespected or something. It's our past always becomes the present when we're being activated, right? And so oftentimes it requires rewiring that memory, rewiring that past, and you know, almost like processing things, because oftentimes we have grown up really not processing a lot of things that happen to us, you know, and we've created a lot of belief systems around it, which then creates our perception of life around, right? That is not to say you never get, but here's the thing, even when you expand your window of tolerance, even when you get dysregulated, it's very easy for you to come back down. It's not a dysregulated system. Yeah. And I'll talk a little bit more about that after as well. So now that we understand inflammation, we understand stress. Now I want to connect what's the connection between stress and disease, and that connection is inflammation. Okay, so there's a lot of research on it now. Now I didn't go through because I knew we wouldn't have time to go through the research, but if you want the primary papers, just get in touch with me. I'll send you the links, and you can also Google, right? What they found that they know that long-term exposure to psychosocial stress. Now, this is the kind of stress we feel, you know, when we're upset, when someone said something, someone cut us off, and that kind of living in a society that thoughts, the feelings, that's a psychosocial stress leads to adverse long-term health outcomes. Okay. They also know that low-grade inflammation has been identified, like we talked before, as a key player in many illnesses. And here's what they also know, is that higher levels of inflammatory chemicals are really, cytokines is just a scientific word. So if you ever read any of the primary research, you will see that it's called inflammatory cytokines, and there's all kinds of different names for that. They're released in those experiencing stress leading to chronic inflammation. So if you're constantly living in that flight or fight mode, right? You are constantly releasing inflammatory markers. Remember when I said, if the the anti-inflammation can't keep up because you're constantly producing all these inflammatory chemicals, right? So the immune system can't shut down the inflammation because you're constantly in that stressed out mode. And this is what links the mind to the body, because we often think, oh, stress, and I know myself, I mean, I knew how triggered I used to be, but I never realized that it was causing issues in my body until I got sick. And that's when I realized, and a lot of, there's evidence when it comes to, because I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, that it is, because it's an inflammatory condition. It's totally connected to our stress levels, right? But all those years, and again, my stress was because of all the things that happened to me that were unprocessed, and so there was a lot of things to unpack there, but I realized, and there's so much evidence, and that's why it's so important that we include stress as part of a treatment protocol, right? If someone is sick, and again, it's not being done as much as I would like within the medical system, but despite whatever medication you take, whatever you want to take, if you don't address the stress, you can't really get to the root cause. And so many of us are experiencing stress. Like I said, I see it all the time in my practice, right? So chronic stress leads to inflammation, which then forms the ground for symptoms and diseases, right? So that's the connection between stress and disease. And the stress they kind of studied was things like job stress, burnout, socioeconomic status, childhood adversity, right? What happened to you in your childhood can actually be causing stress for you in your adulthood. Major life events like deaths, divorces, caregiving stress, self-rated depression, anger, and hostility. All those things were increasing the inflammatory chemicals in the body. Now, many of you will look at that list and say, well, I can't control that. I can't control my terrible boss, right? I have a good boss. I can't control, what happened to me in my childhood. I can't control, how much money I have. And so oftentimes you feel, well, there's so much control. I'm going to change that for you. I'm going to help you see what we can do, okay? So stress response is an activated nervous system, right? We all understand that. That's what it means. Our nervous system is activated. We're in the flight or fight, right? Automatic responses happen. What can we do to calm that activated nervous system? Okay, there's two methods. One is increasing our window of tolerance, and that's what I was talking about, right? That's really changing perception. This requires a lot more work, a lot more inner work, right? Not impossible. It is totally doable. Like I said, because I've seen it happen to me, I know it's possible for everyone. It is not something we can go through right now, but I do a course on this once a year, which I did it earlier in the year, and I'm going to hopefully be doing it next February. And it's a 6 weeks online course, and we really go diving deep, and we work through, we meditate, we journal, we do a whole kinds of things to help you explore what is your sort of deeper wounds, what are your belief systems that are making you see different things as threatening and turning on your stress response, okay? I won't talk about that because it's a huge topic. However, you can actually activate the calming side, the rest and digest. Remember, there was that balance that I showed you? When you are stressed out, it's because your fight or flight is activated. It's high up there because, you have a terrible boss. You have to deal with that. You come home, your kids are giving you an attitude. The weather is terrible. Everything is activating you. If you could do something to just, the calming side is almost like a brake. That's why I have a little foot there. You can actually kind of push this down. And when you do that, you come to balance, right? So the calming side, the side of the nervous system can be used to actually put a brake on this runaway activated nervous system, okay? But how do we do that? How do we calm the activated nervous system? Well, in order to do that, like I said, oops. Now it's completely gone off. Okay, here we go. It's with the help of this vagus nerve. I don't know if anyone's heard about the vagus nerve. Have you? Okay, yeah. It's actually, so let's talk a little bit about the vagus nerve. It's remember I said the nerves are like those highways, right? That's where all the information goes back and forth between the brain and the rest of the body. Vagus nerve, you can see it as one of the highways, 401 of the brain, right? Actually, 401 is very congested. 407 of the brain. So the thing about the vagus nerve is it is the most important nerve when it comes to activating the rest and digest part of our nervous system, right? We've been activated in that stress response. We need to do something to activate the other side, the rest and digest, so we can bring it back to balance. So the vagus nerve kind of, it meanders to the body, it goes behind the larynx, it goes around the ear, in the face, all kinds of things. So that it will explain when I tell you things, what you can do to activate the vagus nerve. So when you activate that nerve, you actually increase what is called the nerve activity of that specific nerve, vagus nerve. So you increase what sometimes you find in literature, it's called vagal tone. When your vagal tone goes up, it means that activity in that nerve, that highway has increased. And remember, any firing in that highway is going to go and tell the brain, hey, nothing to worry about, calm down, everything is good. It's all automatic, but you're doing something to activate that highway. You're sending a whole bunch of information up to the brain, and the brain, it goes to that system that's active, that area that's activated the stress response, and it tells that, calm down, put a brake on it, there's nothing to be afraid of. You're not under threat, you're okay. So do you see how we can do things to actually activate the vagus nerve and calm ourselves down? Deep and slow breathing, the most effective, easy thing to do. And this is exactly what I did when I was coming here, because I knew I was activated. I'm like, just breathe. And I started taking deep breaths as I was turning on to, I think, Dufferin. And then Dufferin had a big truck, and I'm like, just breathe. And I started, and I actually noticed myself calming down, right? Because but I had to intentionally tell myself, because if I didn't, I would have been stressed, right? It's like a tool in your pocket. And the reason why I like the breathing part is because we always have it with us. You know, we don't have to go anywhere. We have it with us everywhere we go. It's like the easiest thing to do. And I remember when I would read before I did all this research on this work, I'll read about breath work, and I'm like, oh, how does it work? I always need to know, how does it work, right? Now that I know what I know, it makes sense, because again, remember, the vagus nerve goes to the lungs, goes to the heart, goes to all kinds of things. And that's why when you activate those areas, so when you do deep belly breathing, so normally most of us will take about 12 breaths a minute or even more, depending on how it's like right now. Obviously, we all are not breathing deep belly breathing. But what they suggest is 6 breaths per minute, which is actually quite slow breathing. And even better, if you have your out breath a little bit longer than your in breath. They found that when that's done, the vagus nerve is activated. And there's studies done on this, right? So taking deep, slow belly breaths and making sure that the out breath is a little bit longer than the in breath. Now, if any of you do yoga or even Tai Chi, I think they actually teach you how to do the proper breathing, right? I think Tai Chi, you guys, some of you do Tai Chi, no? No? Okay, well, I think people in King used to. But yoga, again, same thing, right? Then there's a whole bunch of other ones, but if you get nothing out of it, even if you just know that the breathing will calm yourself down, there is real evidence, it's activating your vagus nerve, and it's going to whatever, because it's an automatic thing that's happened to you, right? If you start breathing, and the more you do it, the more that becomes your natural state, right? And as it becomes more your natural state, you're probably most likely to not get as irritated, because your vagus nerve is always activated, and it keeps you in that rest and digest phase a lot more. Singing also. So next time you're upset about something, start humming, singing, chanting. That's why a lot of indigenous traditions have chanting as part of a lot of the activities. Gargling. Now, gargling was something my functional medicine doctor told me when I first went to him, that you should do this every day, because that will activate. And I had no idea anything about it at the time, and I didn't get it. And I actually did the research, because at that time I was in so much pain, and I was just gonna take the supplements. And slowly I started meditation. I didn't do gurgling, but I did start meditation, and the breath work are the two that I actually did. And meditation, again, has been shown to activate your vagus nerve, right? A consistency every day, even if it's for 5 minutes, right? It will create that activity in your vagus nerve. Exercise also, listening to nature sound, laughter, right? I think I've talked to you about that, how there's evidence that, when you watch and I started watching a lot of comedy when I was sick too, because I read about it, that how laughing can actually reduce inflammation. Well, how does it do that? Because it calms your system down. It turns on the vagus nerve activities. Massage, right? If you can't go for regular massages, they found that self-massage on the feet also activates your vagus nerve, right? So if you're sitting at home and you find yourself spiraling into some negative thought, try massaging your feet, right? Cold showers, again, they've become very popular, this cold plunges. I don't know if anyone's done that. No, it's not that bad. I did do it. But if you can't, just 2 seconds of just cold shower at the end of your shower, even if you're feeling a lot of anxiety or if you're getting upset, putting your face, remember, vagus nerve has a lot of emphasis in the face area, putting your face in cold water. They've actually been shown to activate the vagus nerve, right? So again, you may find other things as well, but understand that a lot of these activities, what it's doing is actually activating a nerve that's going to go tell your brain to calm down, because all the systems are coming from an automatic system, right? So you can take that consciously activate a nerve that's now going to go to the brain and tell the brain to calm down. So this is how you put the brake. Now, even if you've had, a bad day at work, find yourself time to do some of this stuff, right? Because that will make sure that you're not spending your entire 24/7 in that activated flight or fight mode. You are finding, if you can find different times of the day to do one of these things or a few of these things, it will ensure that for that half an hour, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, hour, your body's actually going into the rest and digest mode, right? We need to be spending as much time in there as we can, even if life around you, like I said, there's things around you which are stressful. You open up I go to Instagram and I'm like, all this news comes in, I'm like, my heart starts racing because you see all this and you feel so helpless. You need to do some of these, and I do a lot of these regularly as well. And again, having expanded the window, it really does help, because that's really where the magic is. When you have a wider window of tolerance, you are able to manage that stress so much better than you ever could have imagined. And I think this is the last slide. And so this is the course that I do. I started doing this year again, because this is, I've been thinking about doing it for quite some time. I finally put it together. And I had 8 people in the class do this course with me early on in the year. And honestly, I think I got a really good feedback. A lot of people, and because we really go deep down, and there's a lot of support available during that 6 week, if you're struggling with something. And I try to keep it very small. My max is 10 people. But what I found was that, and one of the girls that took the course with me, and she came back and she gave me feedback that, she had experienced a lot of inflammation since she was in her 20s. And as she let go of a lot of the stuff that I taught her, in terms of her emotions and a belief system, her shoulder pain, she said to me, went away. And that really made me realize, because I know this has been powerful for me, right? And so that's why I offer this, because I really feel that this is powerful work, if you do the work. So if you resonate with this, if you feel you're ready to go deeper, this is for you. If you don't feel ready, that's okay too. Go do those exercises that I talked about earlier, right? Calming down, because that also works, right? There's many different things you can do, but my purpose today is to really make you realize that we don't have to be in that activated stress mode. There is a better way of living. We all want to live a peaceful life, or at least as much as we can. And it is possible. It doesn't have to be, despite what happens around the world, because the world will happen again, unless, of course, we are in the line of fire. That's a different kind of stress that I can't even begin to imagine that people in the world are feeling. But unless you're being shot at or bombs are dropping on you, I think there's a lot we can do when it comes to chronic stress. In the next workshop, I don't have a date yet, because I'm not sure if we can do it in December. I haven't checked with the library, and I don't know how busy it's going to be for us. But either it's going to be December or it's going to be January. But we will actually go into the diet, anti-inflammatory diet, right? How foods can inflame you. Again, it's part of that list that we're gonna go each one. And we're gonna dive deeper into that. So if you're on my email list, you will know when this thing comes up. And I think that's it. Stop the recording. So if there's, we have a bit of time. I mean,